Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session as part of the California Trails and Greenways Conference on Goodbye Golf Courses, Hello Public Parks and Trails, a discussion of a growing trend throughout our country where underutilized and undervalued golf courses are being returned into public green spaces and the core of community trail systems. My name is Eric Bosman. I'm an urban designer with Kimley Horn based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm excited to have my co-panelists introduce themselves. So, Mack?
Thanks, Eric. My name is Mack Cain. I'm a landscape architect here in Atlanta, Georgia with Clark Patterson Lee. I've been practicing in the profession for about 45 years. Most of the work I've done has been based around recreational projects, being trails, golf courses, parks.
Great. Thanks, Mack. Jan?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jan Hancock with my company, Hancock Resources, LLC. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm an equestrian specialist. I'm so glad to be able to be part of this presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Jan. So I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce the topic about these golf course conversions. Mack's going to talk a little bit about a specific golf course conversion in the city of Milton, Georgia, just north of the city of Atlanta. And then Jan's going to spend some time today talking about equestrian elements and how we can incorporate equestrian trails and facilities as part of this type of project. So let's start with sort of the overall picture of what's happening with golf across America. You might remember back to the late 1990s and early 2000s. In golf terminology, we talk about that period of time as having the Tiger effect, a period of time where Tiger Woods was coming into his own, winning the Masters for the first time, and golf was at an all-time high of new folks who were being introduced to the game, new courses that were springing up, and an all-time high in golf course playability. However, since that period of time, there have been over 800 golf course closures over the last decade. And when you consider that a golf course could occupy anywhere from 30 to over 100 acres of land, that's a significant amount of open space that is no longer in use. Prior to the pandemic, course usage had been declining steadily for quite a number of years. Now, if we're being honest, there has been a slight uptick in golf course usage over the last 12 months. Depending on what source you look at, golf course usage rose between 8 and 12% during the pandemic because it was an activity that could be completed outside with a high degree of social distancing. The question in golf course circles and in the golf industry today is whether that is something that will be maintained over time. And the challenge simply is that the core golf course user tends to be middle-aged or older. A large percentage is white. Many folks that used to make the time or take the time for golf or use golf as the cornerstone of a business element, that's simply not the culture and the lifestyle anymore. So as we've seen golf decline, we've seen 19 golf courses over the last decade and a half that have been converted from golf uses into public parks, preserves, natural land, or in some cases, redeveloped into residential subdivisions. I want to talk a little bit and just give you two examples for where we've seen pretty good case studies of how golf courses have been returned as public preserves, natural spaces, and used as part of trail systems. One of the best case studies is Orchard Hills Park, the former Orchard Hills Golf Course in Chesterland, Ohio. Now, Orchard Hills is a 273-acre public park in suburban Chesterland, Ohio. The park, which was completed in 2011, transformed a defunct public golf course into a model of ecological restoration and low-impact park design. The landscape architect led the conservation effort to repair damaged streams, construct wetlands, and reforest expansive fairways. And the design creativity reuses the existing infrastructure in the golf course to support recreation activities that showcase the site's natural beauty throughout each season of the year. The reconstructed park includes 1,500 linear feet of stream, 3 acres of wetlands, 50 acres of forest, and 22 acres of meadow that were developed over a 10-year period. You can also see how a trail system was integrated into the golf course as part of the redesign. A variety of different trails, a variety of different paths that give you different lengths, different experiences, and different view sheds and points throughout the redeveloped golf course. And honestly, some of these pictures are just stunning, that it's not only able to be used as a nature preserve and as a trail system, but they've also included elements like an orchard-themed playground, a large pond with fishing piers, and a variety of winter activities as they use the property also for cross-country skiing and for sled riding during the winter. So think about the opportunity to take 100+ acres of land and reestablish them as community green space, and again, as a 3.6-mile trail system. Another example of this is the former Squire Golf Club in Belgium, Wisconsin. This is a 116-acre former golf course that has been turned into a preserve. And as part of the redevelopment, they've also included a trail system, bird watching, preserved a hardwood forest, created open grasslands and prairies, and reconstructed the wetland ponds. Now, this course was acquired in 2009 through the Ozaki Washington Land Trust, and modifications began immediately, but they're 10 years and still moving forward in terms of the course restoration and the natural wetlands and prairie lands. And again, you see the ability here not only to reposition the clubhouse as a community facility, but the image on the left, which is a former fairway, where now you can see the restoration in progress and the ability to create a soft path trail system through the area. Once again, because you're talking about tens, potentially 100+ acres, there's an opportunity in restoring these golf courses to create a pretty interesting trail system that gives you a variety of lengths, a variety of experiences, and a variety of view sheds, depending on the different types of users that may be within your community. Now, these examples in Ohio and Wisconsin are just two of the examples that we looked at as a team as we were brought an opportunity in Milton, Georgia, to plan the park, the restoration and repositioning of the former Milton Country Club on the north side of Atlanta, Georgia. The way that this particular opportunity came about is Mack and I were actually working for the city of Milton, developing their overall City of Milton Trails blueprint. We were looking at a system of almost 50 miles of side paths, greenways, and shared equestrian routes through the middle of the city when it came to the city's attention that the Milton Country Club was in dire financial straits and was looking for an investor to redevelop or to take over the property. So through the trail network, the Trails Blueprint Master Plan, the city actually had us do an additional bit of study to see how we could connect the golf course property to the overall Trails Master Plan, basically going through a Fulton County Board of Education site that is the home of an elementary school and a middle school, in order to tie the former Milton Country Club into the overall trails connection for the city of Milton. And what an amazing opportunity to be able to take something that looks like this and return it to an area that really was short in terms of green space and community parkland within their community. So what the city of Milton did is in November of 2016, they passed a green space bond to acquire conservation land to provide recreational trails and preserve natural areas within the city. And they used a portion of the proceeds from that green space bond in order to purchase the golf course. The bond itself was a $25 million revenue proposition, and the golf course purchase was $5 million, about 1/5 of the proceeds of the green space bond. And so what that allowed the city to do was build upon the Milton Trails blueprint to approve the green space bond, purchase the former country club, and then initiate the plan the park process to reposition the Milton Park and trail design efforts within the former Milton Country Club site. Now, if you're paying real close attention to that earlier graphic, you'll notice that this is turned 90 degrees. North is actually to the right side of your screen. The front 9 actually weaves around a residential subdivision with the clubhouse in the far northwest. That's the top right corner of your screen. The front 9 actually starts around the bottom side of the subdivision, goes halfway out. There's a middle 9 that's shown as the passive preserve on the back side here, and then the back 9 then winds back around the residential subdivision. So there's the top 9 acres sort of referred to as the North Woods, the bottom 9 acres that are a little more flat and referred to as the South Woods in the overall thinking and repositioning of this course. And not to be lost, there were these existing facilities, a 1-story clubhouse, the cart barn, the pool, a series of active tennis courts, and a public parking area. So when we were brought to the table, we were actually asked to look at the overall condition of the golf course. What do the easements look like, the cart paths, the actual infrastructure? What do we do in terms of nature on the course? And then how do we get the public involved? And we undertook a robust public engagement effort, including an online input portal, an online survey, basically. We met out at some of the city's festivals. We held a series of public work sessions. We had specific outreach. Milton is very well known as an equestrian community, and we reached out to those folks that own many of the equestrian and equestrian facilities throughout the city to see if there was a way to integrate an equestrian trails component into this process. And we held a series of public open houses and council briefings. So this was really a very open process to the community to look at how we could best take this golf course and create a series of community-based amenities that would create a new attraction and environment within the city of Milton to create additional green space. And many of the ideas that you're going to hear about in this project are things that were specifically generated by the community. And frankly, issues that are not too different from this golf course repositioning to any other in the country. There were concerns related to adjacent homeowners. There were concerns about what would happen with fallow green space, and would it actually grow into something useful, or would it be misused? How could we integrate the equestrian component? And then just other general concerns about who would be using the property, when it would be open, would it be active at night, would there be lighting and noise, and what potential impacts would there be to the adjacent neighbors who frankly bought their homes backing up to a golf course because of the atmosphere and the potential solace and privacy that provided. So in working with the city and with the community, we came up with a series of guiding principles that really dictated how we would reposition this golf course into a trail system and into a public green space. So I want to take just a couple of minutes to walk you through some of those key guiding principles. The first was to promote safety and to mitigate the impacts to adjacent neighbors. Again, these are folks that bought homes on a golf course, presumably for that particular character and reason. So if we're turning this into a public park, how do we respect those privacy and safety concerns? Granted, it's probably still better than redeveloping it into another residential subdivision, but that doesn't address those safety and privacy concerns to the degree that they wanted to hear. So we had to take that into account. The second was really to retain the existing programs of the active acres. The swim tennis component was actually quite well used and quite loved by the community. But if this is being taken over as a public attraction and as a public facility, how do we reposition that in a way where it can maintain the use, but also be managed and financially sustainable from the city's standpoint? The next, just giving you a few more of the images there, the next is really to celebrate and restore nature throughout the passive preserve. Again, think about tens of acres of a golf course that were meticulously manicured and maintained when it was used as a golf course. What happens when you return a golf course back to nature? What does that really start to look like? What are the possibilities? And are there ways to preserve the trees and really create new landscapes that restore nature in a way that isn't artificial and doesn't have any of the downside of fertilizers and other treatments that have been part of the golf course for years previously? Our fourth principle was to balance multiple uses within the park. Again, keep in mind, these golf courses can be tens of acres to 100+ acres. 100+ acres of any one thing is probably not the highest and best use of the property. So we worked with the community to really think about how we could create spaces for pedestrians, for nature walks, for bicyclists, for equestrians? How do you vary the flora and the fauna and the botany in such a way that it creates areas of interest? What do you do with the ponds, and how do you make those focal points within the design? How do you create tens of hundreds of acres of activity while still keeping it very natural versus something that is the same over many, many of these acres? So from trails to boardwalks to equestrians, what can we build into the program? Safe spaces and connections were also really super important. I mean, there are many places to hide and to get lost in the back corners of a golf course. So how do we take some of those areas and make them open and safe while still preserving that sense of solace and really natural environment that you want when you go out into these types of places? And how do you sustain the infrastructure that needs to be maintained for years to come? And then you'll hear Mack talk a little more about this, but how do you distribute access and parking throughout this nature preserve? How do you make it so that it's not a major attraction where you have a lot of people if what you're trying to do is create a place of solace and nature? So how do you distribute that access, and how do you manage parking on a site like this? And then again, really to the maintenance and the care and the curation of the site, how do you create partnerships that coordinate among the landowners and the organizations that are likely to want to use and help preserve and protect the park for many years to come? So that's a little bit of the background about what's happening with golf, why these golf courses are becoming available, some of the case studies and some of the principles that we used when we're looking at one specific case study. But I want to give Mack a chance to really dive into some of the design aspects at a little deeper level for how this process came to fruition, and specifically how the trails became a significant component as part of the former Milton Country Club project. So Mack, you want to take it from here?
Okay, thanks, Eric. When we were asked to be on the team, the purpose of our presence on the team was to take the program that is going to be developed through the public involvement process and to look at the land and understand its characteristics and blend those two things together. I mean, to me, landscape architecture has always been the blending of the built environment, which is architecture, with the natural environment, which is landscape, without compromising either one of them. And if you do so, then you get to enjoy both without damaging either or compromising them. So the first thing we wanted to do, as Eric has explained, is look at the land very carefully to see how it affects whatever uses we intend to put on it. And if you look at the presentation, there's actually two parts here. There's the South Woods and the North Woods, and they're both very different. The North Woods is very flat, very open, and has a lot of houses around it. It was initially built as a 9-hole golf course when it was first built for the purpose, as we all know, golf course communities are built to sell houses. And that's basically what this was for. Later on, because they only had 9 holes, they wanted 9 more. They bought the land in the back, and it's very hilly, very thick with vegetation, and they put in another 9 holes. And these 9 holes are very, very up and down and very narrow and a lot more challenging to play. So actually you have 2 parks here. And we wanted to look at how we could take these 2 very strong and different characteristics of land and blend them with the program that we've been talking about. Next slide. One of the things we've learned from doing just hundreds and hundreds of trails in our career is that people like to go in a loop. They don't want to go on a long, straight, dead end, turn around and come all the way back. Sometimes it feels like you're wasting time on the way back instead of enjoying the entire trip. So we wanted to look at how to turn these trails into loops. And one of the challenges we've always had with doing trails in the urban environment, in the suburban environment, is there's nowhere to put them. You get a nice little trail going, and then there's a road, and you can't get past it or over it or under it. So having a golf course with plus 100 acres is a fantastic opportunity to put together a really nice trail system that is continuous and that people can use it over and over. People like to measure themselves when they're on a trail and then a loop, how many loops they want to do. They can count the distance that way. If they're bored, they can turn around and go the other way. next time they come to the park. So the idea was to create trails that fit the loop system and blended with the ground the way it actually sits. And that's what we did here. The active acres was be the entrance to one end, and there's a school on the other end that was used as the access to that point. And you will notice that the trails are a little tighter and a little denser up in the south woods, but more open and lengthy on the north woods. Next slide. Most important, there are two very important things when it comes to being able to use trails. People want to be able to access them easy and quick. They want to be able to get there, get out, use them, and when they get finished, they end up at the same place they started. They want the beginning point and the ending point to be the same place, which is where they leave their car, which is the trailhead. Well, these are the access points. We were a little bit short on having good access points. We have a very good one at the clubhouse, and we're able to establish another one on the back side. The blue ones are emergency and temporary accesses when needed. So we have the access points to get into the park and to get out of the park. Next slide. Then it was to lay out a trail system. Now, everybody doesn't want to use the same kind of trail. People like to jog, people like to run, people like to walk, push strollers, or all sorts of activities and exercises. And you'll see here that the darker red trails are laid out in a loop form so that you can do the big loop on the low ground, or you can do a much more strenuous, smaller loop on the high ground, or you can do them both. You have the option to do as you please. Those trails are made out of a dense granite, slate, compacted material that's easy on the knees if you want to run and easy to walk on. The little brown trails are sort of spur trails where they go over to interesting places or interesting sites. But notice also, because we have houses on this site, we put the trails on the far side away from the houses because that was the biggest concern, was having people in their backyards. And if we couldn't get them far enough away from the trails, we got them down below the slopes so that the houses looked over the trails and couldn't see the people that were using them. Now in the back south woods, there are no houses. So it was very easy to put a loop trail system and blend it in with smaller trails. The brown trails that you see are the equestrian trails. So we kept the equestrian all back on the southwood side, out of view of the people, and have one long trail that runs along the creek, along Chicken Creek, that can't really be seen from the houses. So this blending of these trails gives a lot of opportunity for people to do various different things and use the trails in various different ways. Next slide. But then what are you going to do with all that other land? You know, trails are not that, they don't take up a whole lot of land. They're very narrow. And you got a lot of land to maintain and take care of. These various colors show the various ideas we came up with what to do with that land. Some of the concerns that we have is maintenance, of course. Now you have a parks department that suddenly has 150 acres to maintain. Well, we wanted to go in and reestablish all the natural woods, let it grow on its own. Mother Nature does a very good job if you leave her alone. And then to go into the open areas because they needed to remain open because people want to be able to view for fun and enjoyment, but they also want to be able to see and be seen so that they feel safe. So we turned the yellow areas are all considered meadows. They were replaced with wildflowers and native grasses. So you don't have to mow them twice a week. You only mow them twice a year. And they'll come out in great bloom and then they'll go away and you brown them out and mow them one more time. So you see the major component or major part of the golf course is turned into meadow. Up near the active acres, you'll see a green area where we decided if we have events, we need more parking because we couldn't get enough parking on this site. So we turned the green area into an overflow parking that would serve the active areas as well as any major event we may want to have within the park. The back south woods, we have a place where you could get in with your trucks and your trailers to be able to enjoy the equestrian. And it's very up and down, very dense. So we have these narrow fairways that we turned into narrow recovery zones of the natural vegetation. We want to see if natural succession and the school, which is across the street, can study this. The so can the universities here in Atlanta actually have a place where they can watch 100 years of natural succession and catalog it and record it. The red spot in the middle is a great hill We found out that during snowstorms, the kids would all sneak in here and slide up and down that hill. So we decided to leave it that way and make it accessible for the neighborhoods and the people to be able to come in and use it. We also, on the lower left side is a wetland, and we're going to restore the wetlands, get all the invasives out, put in natural plants, use native plants so that we don't have to take care of them so much, and try to turn this back into a self-sustaining natural park that will sustain itself and be there available for people to use. Next slide. The active area was a small area, and most golf courses have this. They'll have a tennis club, a tennis courts. They'll have a little swimming pool. And as it turned out, the community had turned these areas into their own clubs, and were having tennis meetings and swim teams in here. So we decided to maintain that and to accent that by adding an event lawn, turn the lodge into a community center, and improve the parking access so people could come in. At this point, this is where most people will access the golf course anyway, so that this becomes the front door for the entire park. Next slide. There are great opportunities that will come out of golf courses gradually declining, unfortunately for them. But the history is that my generation, the baby boomers, were not replacing golfers. As our generation dies, there's not as many people that are playing golf. And we're finding out in our recreational studies that golf is declining in its interest. So more golf courses are going to become available. That is a great opportunity because these golf courses are sitting in the middle of a residential area that probably doesn't have any parks around it very close. And if you did want to build a park, you don't have enough land to build much of a park. So here are these great opportunities if these golf courses fail to secure the land and turn it into a better park, another park, and to prevent further residential sprawl coming in and taking up this land. You have the opportunity to preserve existing green space. These creeks and drainways were all piped, so you can take those out, open them back up, turn them into natural drainways, return them back to their natural environment. You can develop additional park facilities and amenities that are not available in the community. You can develop them in safe trails because they're now protected from roads. A lot of trails run along a dangerous flooding creek or run along the side of a dangerous trail, or a dangerous road, and people feel uncomfortable using them. These trails feel safe and people will use them. That's one of the main principles for designing good trails, is that they feel safe and that they're easy to access. Next slide. Now, if you have the opportunity to get a golf course to do this, there are going to be some challenges that you'll have to face. The number one challenge is that the land is very valuable. And so it is very attractive to developers. There'll be a lot of pressure to sell that land to a developer who can make a living, make it, because the infrastructure is there, the price points are there. It's a great opportunity for a developer. So you got to get in ahead of them to get it. It's adjacent. The adjacent homeowners have some pretty high expectations because they're used to living on golf courses and they're not used to living on parks. They don't like the idea of having noise and lights, especially those associated with ball fields. And they can't help but believe that you're going to put ball fields in there, and they don't want them. The golf course usually has easements, legal and physical easements, that allow people to come in and out of their lots or cross their lots. You got to deal with getting rid of those because those are not going to be acceptable in a park. Parking is also an access problem because there's not always enough parking at a golf course to handle the number of people that will come to a park. And you have limited access and entry points at times. We hope that this presentation will encourage you that if you know of a golf course or have an opportunity to talk to a golf course that may be in trouble, that the Parks Department will step forward and have an opportunity to get that land first. Equestrian is a very important part of what we were doing because of where we were. So we brought Jan on board to help us with these equestrian trails that will be integrated into the park. So I'll let Jan explain that part to you.
Thank you so much, Mack. I appreciate your introduction. This is the cover of a book that I wrote for the Department of Transportation. the Federal Highway Administration, and the USDA Forest Service. There was a gap, there's a need for a design guidebook for people that really don't know horses very well and they aren't sure what's safe and how to make them successful. So this is like this would be a good library for professional libraries, a good reference. This book is a government publication, so everything about it is free and there's no copyrights. It's available for free. We'll put in a link to the book and to the order form for you. And you can take, just clip and copy and paste anything in this book into any document. So that's an important part of having this resource. You become an equestrian expert. Next slide. This is truly an equestrian's dream come true, with acres and acres of beautiful open space and the possibility of miles and miles of recreational trails for horseback riding. Next slide. I'm going to share some tips with this conversion from a golf course that makes it safe, friendly, and accessible to equestrian trail users. And many golf courses around the country and around the world have paved golf cart paths. And these are very dangerous. They're hard surface and horses can easily slip and fall. So we need to look for other ways besides the existing cart paths that are paved to give more opportunities for riding, horseback riding in a golf course setting. Next slide. The preferred natural surface trails that mountain bikers like to use, hikers, trail runners, and most especially equestrians. The beauty of a golf course is that there's enough acreage that you can actually create an unpaved pathway for all the different users. We don't have to cram them all onto one trail. Next slide. So when we're laying out the beautiful trail system that Eric and Mack have been describing in their presentation, is that you can really give a totally separate equestrian trail to people without having to worry about people traveling at faster speeds like mountain bikers or people that are out just for a stroll with their dog. Next slide. A lot of the challenge we have for equestrians is that we're really converting more of like a linear open space and trying to create multi-mile recreational trail systems. And how can this be planned? And we got a little pre-idea by looking at some of the loops that Mack was describing. So yes, the answer is, and you can change slides next, is to take the non-equestrian tread that you see in the top left-hand corner and use that same corridor to create a natural surface equestrian tread that can be used by hikers, mountain bikers, trail runners. And you stay pretty close to the existing pathway that's been paved. But the two red X's are two reasons why you would not want to use that adjacent area for equestrians. The first is in the bottom left-hand corner, you see a golf cart. Many of the golf paths for golf carts will have curbing along them. It's a maintenance issue. It helps in many ways to designate where people shouldn't be as opposed to where they should be. This is a real tripping hazard for equestrians. Sometimes the grass overgrows the curb, you can't see it, horses will fall. So stay far away from any curbing in any of the existing golf courses that are paved. And then the second X is in the middle bottom, is the paved path can go like straight up point A to point B along the fall line. But in a natural surface trail that would be in that corridor, that's just going to invite a lot of erosion and a tremendous amount of maintenance. So you want to avoid any of those types of hilly areas where it's just not appropriate to put in a soft surface trail. But all along on the right-hand side, there are three pictures of these beautiful corridors where you can easily put in a trail that can be used paved. A lot of people in regular bikes like to ride the paved trail, or you can use the forested areas and the hills and the area on either side of the paved cart path for equestrian and other trail users. Next slide. And this is a drawing out of the book that I think really helps make this a simple illustration. You see the kind of a ribbon of the pathway that's for golf carts and how you can bend and wind a typical soft surface trail into that same trail corridor. Next slide. And here is what Mack was describing. You can really gain mileage on a golf course for lots and lots of trails just by using stacked loops. That is a way that you can create 5, 10 miles of trails within a really relatively small number of acres because they're all open. And you can connect them with a cross trails, so you can choose the length of horseback ride that you would like, whether it's an hour or more. Next slide. The horses are oftentimes put into a situation with their riders where they have to go under a fairway or where a golf cart would be able to go. But these are really not designed for equestrian use. They are difficult because of the size for just a golf cart and somebody walking with their golf clubs. Next slide. I've put some illustrations in here to show what the ideal culvert would be, or below grade crossing. It should be a minimum of 8 feet wide, as you see in the top left corner, and 12 feet high. Some of these get quite dark, and sometimes there would be an equestrian coming in one direction and another coming from another direction, and they wouldn't know that they're in the same culvert. And I'm going to show you why that 8 foot wide is really important. But also, if a horse decides that something in there is not what they like, they may rear up, and you don't want an equestrian's head to hit the top of a culvert. So anything that's a rounded culvert, like the ones with X's, the only high spot is right in the middle of the top of the circle. And then quickly it drops off where you really don't have much space inside that enclosed situation. Next slide. Here's another thing to watch for when you're planning for trails in equestrian use, and that is there's a lot of bridges and boardwalks that go over riparian areas. They've really not been designed for equestrians. They probably will need to have an engineer take a look at the weight of several horses on that bridge. The other thing is most of the railings on these equestrian pathways will be not really, the riparian area is not really what we want to see the equestrian being shy of anything in the way of sound or other motion. So you really have to allow 54 inches high in those kinds of situations. But be sure you bring an engineer in as well to test for the strength of the boardwalk or the bridge. Next slide. And in planning, it was mentioned that some people's homes are right beside the golf carts pathway. So I just call these pinch points where there's a lot of buildings and then a lot of the existing cart paths are right by a residence. When you're on a horse, you're up 8 feet high and sometimes higher on a very large horse. You can look over your walls into people's backyards so that you lose privacy. So when you see this situation out in a golf course property, you want to avoid these kinds of pinch points where you have a golf cart path. You need to plan another pathway around. And then of course, sounds would emanate from a residence. It could be dogs barking or lawnmowers, and those can also be a startle factor for horses. So you want to avoid these at all costs when you're planning your trail system. Next. This is probably one of the most important diagrams or illustrations in the design guidebook. The horse is are big. They come in different sizes, but this is the standard that you should be designing around, from the tip of the horse's nose to the tip of its tail and beyond where the hock is. You need to allow 8 feet of linear length from front to back on a horse. And you look at the side diagram with a rider on the horse, and the horse normally is about 3 feet in width from hip to hip, but you add the rider and you've got legs and boots and stirrups. And so that adds another foot. So that's where that 8 foot clearance comes from that I've shown you in the under below grade crossings. You have to allow at least 8 feet so that two horses and riders can go in opposite directions. And then one last look at this drawing side view. You know, the horse's hooves are only like 5 feet apart, which is about how far it is between the distance of a mountain bike trail of wheels. So, but the horse's neck and head at another 3 feet. So all clearances for vegetation and everything else really need to allow for the full length of the horse. Next. Here's another drawing, a diagram that is the ideal equestrian trail profile. Again, you can clip and paste this any document. This shows a 10-foot wide trail, but what you really want is to include the elements in the trail design here. What should that tread have in the way of compaction? What is the trim out space for the horse and for the rider? So make it a 3-foot wide trail, but make sure those elements are part of it. Next. And my last two slides are about equestrian parking and staging areas. Because horses are so big, and the horse trailers and the turning radius, you really need to create a space that is just set up for equestrian parking and staging. And then the other people can park in what would be a regular parking space. It's dangerous to have people's dogs and kids running over and trying to pet horses or barking at horses. So separate always works best. And plan ahead, as you see in the bottom here. Many of the golf courses have restrooms along the golf course pathways or at trailheads. You really need a place for a person getting off their horse to use the restroom to tie their horse up. So look for a place where you can put in a parking space with a hitching post. Next. And in honor of this being a California Trails and Greenways, this was a project I did for Big Bear Lake. And the diagonal line you see in this drawing is the dividing line between the city of Big Bear Lake and the San Bernardino National Forest. And they're sharing this trailhead. And the orange trailhead that you see is just for equestrians. And then the purple are just the regular parking spaces for other trail users. If you look closely where the blue line is, that is sometimes snow runoff from the ski runs and melted snow. But you'll see a path that comes out of the orange and it goes in with the dotted line. It's a separate trail and it goes around everything else. And because horses always drop their manure right at the beginning of getting on a trail, it's a survival instinct they have, you will be able to get 300 to 400 yards of a separate equestrian pathway that bypasses everybody else before it joins the regular trail system. That way, people are going to give you an A+ for your design because they don't have to walk through manure with their dogs, with their little kids, and they're all out on the same trail, and you've avoided all of that manure. And my last slide is just a reminder that we'd love to have you, if you don't have it now, please order this. And there is a full color version online with both feet and inches and metric. And then the last thing that I want to ask you to do is read the first 11 pages. It will make you a horse expert. And that in this book, you can go out with confidence and design any kind of equestrian trail you'd like to. So thanks for inviting me, and thank you. I'll turn this back over to Eric.
Great. Thanks, Jan. So hopefully over the last 45 minutes, you've learned quite a bit about the decline of golf courses in America, a bit about some of the opportunities and challenges of taking a golf course and turning it into a public facility and a set of public trails, a little bit of a deeper dive into a specific case study of the Milton Country Club. And then thanks to Jan, some of the tips and unique aspects related to planning and implementing equine facilities, not only as part of golf course conversions, but really as part of any good trail facility. So I really appreciate Mack and Jan joining me as a panelist for this particular presentation. I'm going to pull the slides off for just a minute. Mack, Jan, we've got about 10 minutes or so, and maybe it helps to go through a couple of the questions that may have come through on the chat already. If we don't answer your question, please keep your questions coming in the chat feature so that we can address them. But Mack, I think you really talked about one of the key aspects of this opportunity is where else are you going to find 50, 100, 150 acres of available land that already is sort of a pseudo park that can be transformed into a community facility like this? But I can imagine one of the challenges to any municipality or organization that would take something like this on is, oh my gosh, now I have 50 or 100 or 150 acres. How am I going to tackle that at one time? So how should folks that come across opportunities like this think about how you phase this in over time, and not strap yourself down with an overwhelming to-do list from day one?
Usually there are two types of golf courses that are failing, all of them. Uh, those that run along houses, they're going to be the most sensitive if you try to get them, because the people that live there are going to be extremely sensitive to what you do. And then there are golf courses that are self-contained. There are no houses around them or in them. Those are probably the best for securing for parks. Whereas the other ones really, I think, are the best because they connect people to the land and give them an opportunity to get out of their house and go in a park. The whole reason people buy on a golf course is they don't have people living behind them. Only about 3% of the people that live in a golf course community even play golf. They buy because they like that green space behind them. And it's really just a change of attitude that, okay, instead of people knocking golf courses in my backyard, I now have people jogging and walking behind my house. And in my opinion, is better than having somebody back there with a golf club. But if a community, or a city, or a county can't afford to acquire the entire 150 acres, get half of it, get part of it, but get something, because you're not going to find a piece of land where you can put a park on inside a residential developed area that big, unless it is a golf course that's failed.
Sure. Well, and I think about too, I mean, one of the strategies that came out of your Milton experience is, if I remember correctly, was really sort of a 3 or 4 phase implementation process, right? The first phase was sort of, let's look at the facility itself and get it repositioned so that you've got that clubhouse that sort of works, the community facility. Then there was a phase at sort of looking at the existing cart paths and what could you do in the short term just to repair and replace where the cart paths weren't in good condition. And then all of a sudden, immediately you had a walking trail or a jogging trail that was equivalent of the 9 holes that were up around the neighborhood, right? And then you could phase in other parts over time. But how did you think through some of that phasing?
Well, to bring attention to it, right, the first thing you do is pick the low-hanging fruit, which is the part around the clubhouse. If you open that up to the public, because usually those are private clubs and they have private groups that use them. But when you open it up to the public, then people start using it and realize that it's available. A golf course by itself, even when it's abandoned, is still a very nice green open space that can be used by people. And because the golf cart paths are there, they're not good for horses, but they're good for people and bikes. If you clean them up and repair just the worst little spots, you now have a bicycle trail already made that people who come to the golf clubhouse for the new activities that are happening there can just simply say, oh, look at these trails, and just take off in the trails and explore the park. A lot of golfers will tell you when the golf course closes at night, the people come out of their houses and get all over the golf courses. Well, now they don't have to wait till the golf course is closed. They can come there anytime. So what we'd like to see, or what we encourage them to do, is let it go back natural. Just start letting the grass go away. Stop maintaining it. Let it go back to a natural meadow and a natural trees. if you can open up some of those creeks and let them turn back into what they were and give it some time to heal itself, which will give you time or the community time to raise the money and build the momentum to do the next phase.
Yeah, I love your point there, Mac. I mean, there's a golf course in North Georgia that we frequent as a family. It's a place we go on vacation sometimes. And I hadn't noticed before we did this project, but after this project, I readily noticed there are all these signs that you're not allowed to walk the golf course between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. But you're right, at 7 p.m., then it's fair game. Everybody comes out and gets their stroll in during the evening before it gets dark.
With their dogs.
With the dogs, absolutely. With my dog as well. So Jan, I thought you mentioned this in your portion, but I want to give you a chance to talk a little more about it. I mean, if Mack's bringing all these pedestrians and dogs and bicyclists into the park, you sort of talked about the necessary separation once you introduce equines and equestrians into the process. What are some of the things you think about, and what are some of the tips and tricks in addition to the start and the end of the path, which you hit really, really well? What are some other tips and tricks for how you maintain that safety and separation?
Thanks, Eric. I definitely would advocate for going to the Trust for Public Lands and have a long-term game plan. If you are giving an opportunity for a community to think about using a golf course as a public park and trail system, I think the Trust for Public Lands would be very, very, they would feel this would be a very good investment for 25 years or 10 years. It just depends. But I think that any community that would appeal to the Trust for Public Lands could have a lot of, well, what you'll do is you'll be turning those homeowners into advocates because they don't want to look down on what used to be a beautiful golf course with alleys and garbage trucks, and where the development really takes over all those beautiful acres. So sometimes the owners become the strongest advocates that have lived on the golf course in the past. My tips that I alluded to were things to avoid, but the thing that I think is most important is to check out the opportunities, because equestrians are getting closed off from many, many trail systems that where the urban fringe comes in on the open space and there's no access. But I really think I would put number one and number two as safety, and then number two is access to those trails.
Great point. And I think your point to the, involving someone like the Trust for Public Land is a great idea. I think some folks may be thinking, how do you even get started with something like this? Sometimes the Trust for Public Land has grants that can help. I know the example that we showed at the very beginning of the presentation in Chesterland, Ohio, a lot of that was purchased through the Ohio EPA and the United States EPA under the Clean Water Act. So that provided some of the funding. I know that we've seen other examples where the purchase of the golf course was through a conservancy or through various foundation grants. So some of those are great partners as well in terms of helping acquire some of the land that may otherwise be unutilized. So those are great points. Jan, I think also early in the conception of Milton, we actually considered taking half or most of the South Woods and really creating a separate equine facility so that we could keep a maximum amount of separation. And then we heard a lot of pluses and minuses to that, right? Some thought it should be totally separate. Some thought it should be more interspersed. I guess it varies a little bit from community to community.
Well, and it also varies from golf course design to golf course design. Sometimes the fairways are very narrow. In other cases, with the sand traps in the waters and other things that are incorporated in the golf course itself, it creates the opportunity just by the layout of the golf course. So I think the best way to plan for equestrians is to look where the least conflict could occur between speeds, runners and mountain bicyclists with equestrians. So looking at all the options, and a separate trail would be, I think, extremely important to plan for. If you can't get it, you've at least tried.
Great.
And Eric, when you have a golf course that's wide, you have a lot of opportunity to put trails separated from each other. Usually when we do trails, we're sticking them in a little narrow right away beside the road, or leftover piece of land down by a creek, you can only get one little narrow trail in there. But with a golf course, you got wide space to put several different kinds of trails. And another way you might consider financing and carrying the process is golf courses destroyed a lot of wetlands a long time ago when they were building them. Well, those conditions still exist. They've just been altered. So now we go back and fix them. We go back and return them to what they were as wetlands, and you get a wetland mitigation bank, and it becomes a financial resource for helping to move the golf course, move the project forward.
Great. Yeah, one of the things that I always found a little bit humorous about this, Mac, whether we're trying to build trail systems in wetlands or utility easements or now golf courses, the community resistance is still the same, right? Just because it's a golf course doesn't mean we don't still have the NIMBYs and people don't want them in their backyard. But we definitely have a lot more wiggle room on a golf course than we do in many of the other places where we're working on trail systems.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, that's about our time. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. We know that it's towards the end of the conference, and we appreciate you hanging in there on a Friday afternoon. This type of opportunity has really been a revelation for the three of us. I mean, we've had an opportunity not only to work in Georgia, but to look at a number of opportunities around the country now that with these significant golf courses that are not meeting their financial goals anymore, that these opportunities are becoming more and more to the table, more opportunities to look at this. So we appreciate the opportunity to sort of put this on your radar, but again, reinforce how exciting it is, despite the challenges of 2020, that more and more people are looking to get outside, that they're looking for trail facilities, that they're looking for experiences where they can get out into nature. We're excited to play our small role in that, and are excited to have all of you be a part of that movement as well. So thank you for attending this afternoon. Thank you for being a part of the conference. We hope everyone has a great afternoon and a great weekend. Thank you so much for being here.